Hi, this is Mike from the Film Lab on thesubstream.com, and today we are going to talk about everybody's favorite piece of filmmaking technique. That's right, my friends, it's budgeting! Now, why have we chosen to talk about such a fascinating subject? Well, it all started a couple weeks ago, my friends, when I saw this.
The only life they've ever known is war.
He loves playing in the jungle.
Exactly.
We'll see. Not so funny.
And I had, like many of you had, I'm sure, a flashback to my childhood in the 80s. We don't have any 80s childhood flashback footage. I'm sorry for tricking you. But I remember watching all those Schwarzenegger and Stallone and Bruce Willis movies and knowing even then that as cool as they were, I was never going to get to see all of those action dudes together inside one giant mega monster movie. At least, as it turns out, until they all get really, really old and really, really cheap, so that there won't be $200 million on either side of the line. In film budgeting, there are two kinds of expenses: above-the-line expenses and, surprise, surprise, below-the-line expenses. The line itself is now theoretical, but used to be practical, a literal line on a piece of paper that marked the separation of money spent before production began. Above the line, money spent on stuff like signing super famous Austrian weightlifters to $20 million contracts, like the money you need to spend to hire a director and producers and screenwriters, money you need to spend to buy the rights to a property, and so on. Below the line is the money that you spend once you start shooting: the assistant directors, the equipment rentals, the grips, the sparks, the caterers, the film you need to shoot, the explosions, the stunt guys, the pyro, the DOP, the effects, the editor, all of that stuff. In 1986, you'd never have seen a movie like The Expendables with those guys when they were in their prime, with Arnie and Sly and Bruce Willis and Dolph Lundgren, because you'd have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on their salaries alone, and then you'd have to hire a famous director and a screenwriter, and they'd probably be doing some kind of cool adaptation of some original intellectual property, and you have to spend over $100 million above the line before you even started shooting, which happens sometimes. They make these big above-the-line expenditure movies, but usually when they spend all of this money on a bunch of famous actors and a famous director, they're not making movies that have enormous below-the-line costs as well. Famous actors, famous directors, usually they don't end up in movies with explosions and CGI. They usually end up in movies like, I don't know, Funny People, where it's people in a diner being famous and cute, talking to each other, and there's not a whole bunch of people lit on fire and exploding in the background. Which is why we had to wait 20 years to see a movie like The Expendables, so that the production costs below the line weren't dwarfed by the costs of salaries for guys like Sly and Arnie and Bruce in their prime. We had to wait for them to get wrinkly and a little bit older, a little bit wiser, and a whole hell of a lot cheaper. But it doesn't matter to me, because you're still worth $15 million and 20% of the gross profits, Sly, and I will see anything that you ever do.